$100 an acre. Okay, that's my cost. I'm looking at, let's say, okay, 100 acres cost to get into this. Is there any like, hey, we don't guarantee that you have a nutrient value here? Is there a way for a guy to know?
If you want to call in and just visit with one of our team, we can give you, I mean, we've done work in every state, so we can give you like, tell us what county your ag real estate's in. We'll tell you what the neighborhood's doing right now. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
What reports in your area have yielded in terms of deduction value.
Okay.
So, it gives people a pretty good indicative value when you're just trying to make that first decision that, hey, we want to go forward. Because, you're not going to know until we know, right? I mean, nobody knows until you know. But we can get you kind of a neighborhood number that would get you, at least what you're looking at. You know what I mean? There's a few areas. We looked at a ranch up in Oregon that had vastly diverse soils from one end to the other. I mean, it was alluvial-less on one end and like volcanic ash on the other.
Yep.
And, really different soils. So, sometimes it's a little more complex to answer that question. But it's, we can get you in the neighborhood. You know what I mean?
So you got a 100-acre field. It's like, hey, here's my 100-acre field. Is there any starting point? Pretty good chance that there's going to be at least a starting point. I mean, okay, so what if I've already grid sampled this ground?
Well, it's an interesting question, and we've come to the conclusion in our business that our clients are a lot happier when they let us do the soil sampling.
Sure.
Because a couple of things. We're using different methodology, right, than like an agronomy sample would use. We're using actually a digital probe system that reads the nutrients in their native environment in your field, right? And at the end of the day, I mean, we're going to read attributes out of that soil that are designed to support the tax deduction work, not the agronomy work.
Yep.
Okay.
You're telling me there's a difference?
Well, we're using. I mean, you're an agronomist, aren't you?
You can rip.
Okay.
No, I'm a farmer.
Okay.
He's an
so
agronomist.
I mean, we're using Malick 3 methodology in terms of the analysis. Most of the agronomy labs are going to be using a Bray methodology, which I'm not saying it's just different. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
We're not out trying to do agronomy work, right? And so, our clients are happier when they use our methodologies and our equipment to pull the data out of the soil for their report.
Does it help you guys at all to look at a past soil test?
Well, we've looked at thousands of them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. I mean, we've done estimates off of. If you've got a grid sample, we'll say look at it and pick out some of the major nutrients out of there, whatever's available in the report, and say, hey, it looks like you've got a deduction range in this range, something like that. They can be useful in that respect. But in terms of like basing a report on it, if you think about it, if that client ever gets into an audit situation, I have no knowledge.
Yeah, you have
I have no proof that that
Right.
sample even came off of that ground.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? Where if you're using ours, everything, all the geocode points, everything is in that data set.
Gotcha.
So we can prove everything in an audit.
And so as I'm understanding this, like let's say phosphorus, is there a starting point to where from this level up is your extra nutrient value, and then there's a dollar amount put on that?
That's one way to look at it. I mean,
Like, do you go dumb level? Like I'm kindergarten here. It's like
No.
where's like the base line, how this the value is of just let's say phosphorus, and
Well,
then
it's
based on fertility price at that time or fertilizer price at that time.
Yeah, at the time of the acquisition, right? The acquisition date on the real estate. That's
Yeah.
when you set the market value. And as to baseline, I mean, that's one of the tests that we have to pass for the IRS. And we do it very accurately, and it varies from farm to farm. So we just make sure that we have the correct adjustments for each individual farm, so that anybody that looks at it down the road is going to be comfortable, right? Anybody that knows what they're looking at is going to be comfortable with the deduction value. And we're conservative. I mean, we only sample the top 6 3/4 inches, right? We all know there's a lot of nutrient down below that. We don't get into that, okay? We don't put any value on N, for instance, because it's transient. It doesn't build up. It volatilizes, it leaches, it gets used up. It just doesn't build up in the soil. So we don't even put a value on that. And what we find is, looking at the macros and the micros that are essential for crop production that are used in our report, even with conservative, the measures of conservancy that we build in to our methodology, the values are still good, for a farmer in terms of getting a deduction. And, we talked a little bit earlier about, nutrient levels and soil sample methodology. One of the interesting discoveries, two of them actually, is in the drier areas of the western states, kind of the mountain west of the United States. We found that those nutrient values can still hold in there really good with ground in the Midwestern plains, the more what you think of like the black dirt 3I states. And that's because those areas get a lot less rainfall. The nutrients are not leaching out of there like, they might in other parts of the country. And, people come to us. The second point is we get people come to us and say, oh, I'm not going to include this farm because it's just not a good farm. You know what I mean? It never produces a good crop. It's along the river, it's in a bottom or whatever, they have some reason why it doesn't produce a good crop. And that's absolutely true for agronomy reasons. But when you go in there and you look at that from a deduction standpoint, what you'll find is you might have a really good package of nutrients. They're just out of whack for doing crop production.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? You may still have
the other underlying issues. Before it could be a drainage, flood out area. It could be something else, a sandy knob that is the first thing to lose the water.
But in terms of, helping you reduce the overall cost of owning that piece of real estate, it still has value.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? More so than you might think.
Sure.
So that's kind of some interesting observations. Sometimes marginal ground might not be good for crop production, but there's still a good, a worthwhile nutrient.
This would be
deduction.
A value add to marginal ground.
Yeah.
I mean,
you can use it.
This is a lot easier than trying to raise bushels, to offset the cost of marginal ground.
Right.
I know people talk about, other areas of revenue. Well, what about just money saved?
Yeah.
Well, and that's, we talked a little bit earlier about, when budgets are tight, and we all know that, sometimes a landlord dies and you just have to buy something, to keep your operation whole. And this is one of the tools, a very cash efficient tool to reduce the overall cost of owning that ag real estate by 10 to 20%, depending on where you're at on pricing.
Buying power.
Well, maybe that kind of goes into the next part, and we kind of talked about before this, is maybe some misconceptions. Because one of the misconceptions that we were talking about was, if I've been farming that ground and I buy it from landowner, I'm not able to deduct.
Yeah, I've read a couple of articles published out there that make that claim. Our thinking on that, though, is a little bit more practical. I mean, when you think about a landowner operating a piece of ground for a landlord, generally we don't see those tenants like way overspending on inputs, right? They're prescribing, right? They're doing the right thing. They're going out there and
year-to-year plan.
Yeah, they go out and they want to grow 200 bushel corn on that farm, so they do their agronomy work. They get their their input prescription and they put that on there, and then they go out and they harvest that crop. So we don't see like huge loads, being built up over time. Soil health can make a big difference for agronomic reasons, but on nutrient load, it's a fairly benign effect. But when you get into the landowner status, now you've bought that farm. Well, you're still going to deduct what you apply in your prescription, right? That's still that's an operating deduction, separate tax code section. Different type of expense. But you went out there and bought that farm, right? And you sat there at the auction, you raised your hand 3 or 4 times, you called your banker, raised your hand again, and you figured out how to get that thing bought. Well, you paid for that whole farm and all that it contains, right? And you probably paid more for that farm, partly because it's part of your operation, partly because it can produce X number of bushels, right?
Yeah.
And that's how we price ag real estate, right? We price it on production value. So, a farm that'll produce 200 bushel draws more dollars than a farm that'll grow 100 bushel. So you just paid again for those nutrients, right? You capitalized whatever was left over on that farm. You had to pay for it again. So it's in my opinion, you've essentially paid twice for those nutrients, right?
Well, and I think it's a breath of fresh air because I know a lot of times those papers, somebody else has read them and it just like, well, I'm not even going to look at it again. It's nice to see.
I don't have hope.
Yeah.
I was in the same boat. Like, I haven't bought a piece of ground. It was 3 or 4 years ago since my wife and I bought our last farm.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, shoot, I missed the window, and now I'm like, maybe this is worth looking into.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's definitely worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we don't see a value for you in there, we're going to tell you that right up front. You know what I mean?
Nice.
And the reason that we have advising CPAs available is because we don't want anybody to do anything they don't understand,
Yep.
right? We want you to be confident, understand what you're doing, and proceed accordingly, right? So that's our commitment to our clients. We want to make sure that every report we publish is, bulletproof and ready to do the job for the client.
Would you say how many guys, if you've liked the information that you've seen so far, go ahead and check out the full-length podcast on our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe there. It's also on all the major podcast platforms. We're constantly dropping info and more content on all the social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, etc. Check it out for a lot more content.